Well, I stay in the office most of the time. If we have a big conference, I don't sit up on the front table here that talk about that. Academics and people who want to be sophisticated. People over there, I think I've heard twice in my 13 years in this business, somebody saying, you know, who are you to be telling us? But I hear much more often, I can't believe you're over here in the heat, in the dust. You don't even have this problem at home, and thank you for what you're doing.
One day we're gonna get cordless ones being
couple of questions. The poster ladies in the video are the women who have decided not to do this anymore. The question is this driven more by the men or the women, this ancient practice? The other thing I wanted to ask about is just that, you know, I have a similar quandary in El Salvador, where I visit villages, and there's this issue that families have traditionally had 8, 9 kids, and the reality is that it's not sustainable. There's not enough land to continue that way. But far be it from me to preach that, and preaching that is not the right tactic anyway. The tactic is the empowerment of girls and women with education and learning. And is this seen as a route that should follow along with what you guys are doing?
I would think so, although it's a little bit of a murky association. It certainly does. People in the movement want to empower girls and women, but we also are aware of not trying to make our message too broad, because it's going to be easier to get the idea of not cutting the girls accepted if you don't say, you know, now your girls are going to have rights, they're going to be telling you what they want to do, and your women are going to start telling you what they want to do. So it's a real hard judgment call. And, you know, as I was saying, I was so frustrated that everybody I was working with seemed to think that it was the reasonable thing for the exciser who had made the decision to stop excising to let her husband lead the meeting. And even at the women's ministry, I was saying, you know, can't we have the woman herself? And they're saying, no, people are going to think we're trying to turn upside down the whole society.
And you get a good you get a good clue about that with the family code. The family code that happened. You know, if we give you the banning excision, then we're going to take all of these other things away. You know, you're going to have to now really get permission from your husband, and lowering the age to marry, you know, all of these other things, so in the exchange. So there's a lot of fear around that. So you do have to focus. You have to focus. Although in some areas, where was that? In Kenya, there's some places where there is the alternative. They are starting the alternative educational centers for girls and teaching them how to be whole young women. Was that in Kenya?
Yeah, in Kenya, a place where they typically are still doing excision at, you know, an older age than they do in Mali, mostly on infants, but where they have these ceremonies and, you know, girls are sequestered for a week or two and learn all these important things about the society and then get cut as well. A lot of people have been saying, let's teach them all these things about the society and not cut them. And that's catching on to a certain extent. The other thing that's exciting about Kenya is how the law there is really being used to protect girls. We saw a movie that shows a number of them, you know, running to the courts and saying, my family wants to excise me, and they say, look, here's a restraining order, and the parents are mad at first, but then one of the fathers was saying, we got educated. So, did I answer your first question, Dean?
Not completely. I mean,
About the outsider business?
the first question was, who's driving this, the men or the
Oh,
women?
right, yeah. It's, the women are doing it thinking it's for the men. But meanwhile, the men are lots of times looking for unexcised women to marry. So it's the saddest thing. I understand it that just when something so traumatizing happens to you, you hope to goodness it was for some good reason. And your mother told you, you know, you'd never get married if you didn't have this happen, and it would be shameful. And so since it was so painful, you just cling to that. A lot of people do, but then a lot of people are saying, that's nonsense. Even though I love my mother, you know, she was wrong. And I think there are, I'll be able to find a man to marry. Some men still want it, but I'm pretty sure that the majority either don't care or prefer it not to happen because they see all the troubles that they have. A lot of times they don't make the association. They just see, you know, women never want to have sex. They don't know why.
And a lot of times the girl, you know, she'll have fistulas, you know, there'll be some serious complication. And what we saw in the films were this will happen, and then some guy will pronounce, oh, she had this done and then she had bad luck. You know, and then she had bad luck after.
The father will explain it was just all, you know, funny
The
coincidence.
bad luck happened a long time ago.
I don't know if the answer to this is fruitful for anybody else, but I have an image in my mind and heart that has stayed for many years since I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Liberia in 1963 and 1964. And we were situated in an area called Sinkor, outside of Monrovia. And one day, a lot of beautiful young women came through dancing. They were unclothed down to their waist, and they had a white kind of clay covering them. And I think somebody said something. I didn't know what was going on, but I had a feeling there was something terrible about it. That there, I think maybe I heard the word initiation. But I think that they were being prepared for that. Am I?
It could be. Different countries have different traditions, but in Mali, the garb that they put on girls after they're excised is typically white, sometimes black and white, and they'll have some scarf. I've never heard about mud going on them, but you know, different countries are different.
I think kind of a clay. And in Liberia, there's no shame in a woman's breast being seen when they go out, like into town or something. No, they're dressed, but they're not to show their legs. But they can sit on the porches. And, see, I'm talking from a long time ago, so I shouldn't say it's in my mind now. But you know, they nurse their babies and all out on the porches, uncovered. So it's not the breast is not a sex symbol. So it was nothing terribly unusual that they were uncovered. But I remember my feeling about the thing, which was awful.
It could have been something related to that.
I think it was.
Okay, question here.
I'm thinking about Eve Ensler and the Camp Joy that she has in the Congo, and you know that whether or not there'd be any replication from that type of model. Also, I'm thinking about how we are rightfully horrified by this, listening to it, But I think that the flip side in this culture is we're not getting genitally mutilated, but there's so much pressure to, wear high heels, have your, your cosmetic surgery, to be always judged by how you look. That, we don't see that here. There's a different kind of
And there's
oppression.
much less pressure there about how you look. People find much more acceptance about how they look in many ways. They don't have that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's true. There are plenty of problems here along those lines too.
It is basically a matter that oppression of females is universal. It's just a different style of doing it in each and every one.
That's true.
Hi, well, your whole issue is so important. I think that there's an even bigger issue that really isn't being spoken to. And are you familiar that Mr. Bill Gates, who wants to vaccinate Africa, has bought 500,000 shares of Monsanto? Yes, check it out. And the depopulation of Africa is in progress. And I've heard that villagers run away from the vaccinations that are tainted. And this vaccination is the European method of getting rid of Africans. It's pretty disgusting. And I think the Africans have to get that through their heads, that they're on the chopping block.
There are a lot of huge issues in Africa that all need to be worked with, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that.
The discrimination against women, females, is the most widespread discrimination in the world. It's thousands of years old. The first discrimination was against women. They were the first slaves in history, thousands of years ago, at the foundation of civilization. And what you are involved in right now is a very important aspect of there's so many, many ways that women are discriminated against and oppressed. Here in the United States, it is extremely horrible that many people are not even aware of it, of the oppression of women here in the United States in so many, many, many ways. The only continent that they're not being oppressed is in Antarctica, in different ways. Now, very briefly though, I'm totally in favor of what you're doing. There's so many groups in this country and around the world that are opposing varying types of oppression and discrimination, racial, class, etc., gender. And I've been involved in things like that for decades, since 1960. But also since 1960, I look at it, we have to get rid of the entire system of exploitation. As long as we live in, I call this the United States of criminal insanity, run by criminals. We are the victims of the most criminal government in world history. And Africa is the wealthiest continent in terms of natural resources, but have 20 of the poorest countries. And now to get the wealth of Africa and around the world, yes, they do want to lower the population there. And I know during the 1980s, some people saying that AIDS was something that they experimented on with Africans there to try to drive down the population growth. Is very possible. And if they didn't do it, it's not because they're too moral.
No.
This is a lying, hypocritical government run by criminals from George Washington to Barack Obama.
I'm a grad student and I did 2 degrees in environmental engineering. The reason that I got those was I was interested in low-tech water treatment systems, and I've been volunteering with groups in West Africa for 8 years. And one thing that's been really challenging to me is this notion of just I'm at odds with most of the ways that international development is portrayed and whatnot, and I'm just wondering, in terms of this, there's the risk of portraying African folk as uncivilized and sort of barbaric or whatnot, which would sort of reinforce the imagery that a lot of NGOs profit off of, because they'll just put up a picture of a young African child and then they give us your money, and just wondering how you folks, I mean, have struggled with or tried to avoid that in terms of, I mean, it seems like you're doing good work in terms of having folks speak for themselves and having leaders deliver the message, but when you bring it back here, how does the message come across so that it's not treating African folks as, you know, folks without their own ability to make decisions and intelligence and all that?
Well, there are a lot of folks here that, they have that image already, so you're right, that's an issue because it starts already in people's mindsets. So it doesn't take much to tip that, you know, when you're talking about that, but I don't think that that's enough reason to not go and do good work. So that's kind of how I think about it. I haven't done the FGM work on the ground in Mali, but I have gone to various countries in West Africa and East Africa and Southern Africa doing different kinds of work in terms of people helping to raise the awareness of them continuing their own traditions and supporting that. So, yeah, there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of education to be done, and how I work with it personally is I work with a lot of folks here in kind of connecting with their values and cultivating the self, just as I would over there. I think it needs to be as much done here as it does there. It's different ways. So that's kind of how I talk about it in some of the other work that I do. But there's a lot of education that needs to be done here with people, because you bring up that subject and people want to, you know, they do want to have this lens of just focusing on this horrendous thing that happens there, and huge denial about what's going on right here and even in their own lives, you know. I mean, money doesn't solve everything, you know, and there's a lot of sickness here with money.
I guess what I would say to that is just that we try to emphasize the people over there who are doing good things and, you know, who have the right values and who are struggling against this ancient tribal stuff. It's a hard, you know, I wish that you could just be sure that nothing that you do is going to make people think worse of Africans, and we do our best.
And that's what stops a lot of the women from doing the work there, to stop the practices, because a lot of it is the views of the West, I think, as well, because so much has been taken away from them. They feel like even in this horrendous practice, it's like, this is ours, and you're not going to take it, even though it's horrible, you know. And that keeps them from moving forward. This is ours.
This will be our last question.
I want to find out, you talk about the demutilization, but what do you do with the follow-up as far as infection control? Are there antibiotics available for these women? The treatment,
There's
treatment, I mean
The harm reduction healing.
that's what I'm asking.
the people who've already had it done.
Yes, what does the group do for them, for those ladies?
Well, we refer them to the government that has a little bit of money for this kind of work. It's not as good as we'd like. When I'm there, I've just, you know, given some money for a few people to be treated that happened to come up while I was there. But I remember one time we had a woman who had spent 5 years with this horrible incontinence. She lost her husband. She was living in a place outside of the village, and we thought she probably had a fistula. And we took her to the doctor, and it turned out she had a urinary infection. I gave them $30, and that was the price of a visit to the doctor and the medicine she needed. And so she walked away fine. It's not always that easy, but there's just, it's so, you know, when you have no money at all, and you don't even think of the idea of going to the doctor because you don't even have enough money to eat with, sometimes things can be simple. But then we had women that we knew who would who did have fistulas, and one of them, after 4 operations, she still couldn't get treated, and it was a question of if someone can find money to send her to France, maybe she can stop being incontinent, but it's a real problem, and there are some organizations who focus on that mostly. We mostly focus on just trying to prevent more girls from getting cut, but in the UNICEF grant that we have now, there's a certain amount for treatment in there. I was glad to see that, because those women need something too.
Exactly.
Thank you both so very much for sharing with us.
Thank you for having us.